Okay, hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Isaac's basically music review channel. I haven't been posting lately, but I have been listening in sort of in the background, and I have written some scripts up, continuing along with my Rolling Stone 500 Greatest Albums project. And so today we are on album number 499, which is Ask Rufus by Chaka Khan and Rufus. So basically this time I'm going to do a bit more of contextualizing of the album. Last time I kind of just, dove into my sort of impressions. But this time I'm going to go ahead and talk a bit more about the context around the album, as I've done a bit of research on my own about the band and the album itself. So let's go ahead and start with context. So I mainly use Wikipedia to do some research on this band and also on the album. Essentially, Rufus was known for launching the career of Chaka Khan, who became known as the Queen of Funk, right? She became known as one of the sort of big pioneers in the funk world. And so she is kind of a legend in that respect. So in this album, Ask Rufus was basically a big success, right? It went platinum, which is to say it sold more than 1 million units. And basically for Rufus, this was basically their last really successful album. After this one, they didn't really have much success, or it kind of tapered off, and Chaka Khan became sort of the main person and sort of launched her own solo career after some time. But there were a couple albums that succeeded this one that were released by Rufus, but they weren't as nearly as successful as this one. So around the time of the next album, Street Player, Chaka Khan released her self-titled debut, and so that one, it caused a bit of tension because the members of Rufus were sort of, I guess, a bit tense about that, and then they basically published an album without Chaka Khan called Numbers, but she came back to record one called Master Jam, and another one without her, but then a contract required her to come back and do another one called Camouflage in '81, and then Chaka Khan left, and that was that, and she started and really moved on as a solo artist. So that's about the context of the band. As far as temporally, we're talking about the year 1977 was when this was published, but we'll talk about that in a second. The genre is funk, right? So funk is, to me, the most prevalent genre that you could use to categorize this album. And then, Wikipedia also mentioned that soul and disco are a part of this album in terms of genre. I would say that funk and soul are probably the most prevalent, but funk for sure I think is even more prevalent than soul, and there's, I think, a touch of disco there too for sure. So a little bit about funk, right? It originated in African American communities in the mid 1960s, and it's meant to be a danceable form of music, right? So we're meant to be able to groove to it and dance to it and things like this. And sort of the stylistic origins of funk would be soul, rhythm and blues, jazz, and a bit of gospel too. So then the year that this one was published, 1977. So this was when Jimmy Carter was president of the United States, right? In terms of the U.S. Significantly, it's also the year that Elvis Presley died. So that's kind of a important moment in the history of rock and roll, but also in the history of popular music. This is also when Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder, which is on this Rolling Stone list a bit later on, was won at the Grammys. This is also the year that the plane crash killed 3 of the members of Lynyrd Skynyrd. And then finally, and kind of more close to my own personal interests, this is the year the Sex Pistols album was published, Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols. And it's also the year Star Wars came out. the first one. So that's a bit of context about this album. But I also, the main thing I want to emphasize in these videos is sort of my own impressions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that I took away from this record. So the first thing I sort of got was this sound of dramaticness or drama. As I mentioned in my previous videos, right, I sort of do a stream of consciousness writing exercise about each album that I listened to. And in this one, I kind of talked about the dramatic sound, right? This sound of drama, and we see that with some of the strings we have, and also piano and synths in places. So in other words, this drama is sort of brought on by the instrumentation, right? The vocals are also important, but there's this sort of like big sweeping nature that the instrumentation lends to the record, right? The sort of intensity, right, which I found notable. And then, we sort of have these, like, the vocals tend to be held, we sort of have these held over notes in the vocals particularly, which again lends to that dramatic sound, right, operatic almost. And then, I think, it's interesting to talk about my impression of the record at the time I listened to it, or shortly after I listened to it when I wrote this reflection. But at that point, the drama was what stood out to me the most, right? So I think, really, these videos are meant to be sort of a timeline of my experience as a listener, right? As I sort of cut my teeth on more intentional listening to music, right? And use my sort of critical thinking skills from my English education on this not a new medium to me, but a medium I'm taking more seriously than I have historically in music, right? But anyway, I think, it seems dramatic, perhaps literally, because we have this sort of theatrical bent of some of the vocals, some of the instrumentation, right? Which would make it literally dramatic, right? But also, to me, drama suggests like the rising and falling, right, of plots. Even in the more quotidian sense, we have the sense of gossip as drama, right, interpersonal drama. So that kind of intensity, that kind of, ups and downs is kind of what I'm picking up on this record. So yeah, in that, in any case, the dramatic nature of this record sort of left an impression on me, right? The other thing that leaves an impression, or left an impression, and that I still remember, is the sort of lyrics in this record. So I sort of zeroed in on 3 different songs and 3 different sort of themes that I found in the lyrics. The first one is found especially in the first song, My Love Will Lift You Up, right? And that's going to be love as a theme, right? Love, pretty inarguably, is the most prevalent theme in pop music. And this album has its fair share of it also. So to me, and I think having listened to over 100 of the Rolling Stone records by now, I'm a bit behind in the videos, but I've listened to over 100 of the records. I find that love is, one of those motifs and or themes that comes up a lot. And I tend to think of it as a generic theme for that reason. But of course, love is multifaceted and has its different dimensions, so we can think about it in different ways, different metaphors, different figures of speech can come to bear on that motif too. So there was that, right? And so that's sort of the least interesting to me. The other one was this sort of connection to the earth and stars, right? So this is in Earth Song, right? Which was one of the songs on the record. It sort of has this connection to the broader cosmos, right? The sort of ecological even angle you can see in this song, right? We're all part of a single existence, etc. All is transcendental, right? That kind of idea was interesting to me. But the other interesting thing is that kind of blends with the drama, right? This sort of dramatic bent and this dramatic sort of nature of our connection to the cosmos, right? And then finally on the song Hollywood, right, which stood out to me being a native of California and Southern California in particular, you know, it's this old story of this person who wants to make it big in Hollywood, right? And they are just sort of a wanderer, right? A vagabond. So it's an interesting picture of this sort of classic story, but also it's not really one you see a lot in music in general, right? This sort of this idea of someone who wants to make it big in show business in Hollywood, right? Which presumably has the connotation of show business. So that was interesting to see, right? That's not something, it's not one of those common themes in pop music, I would say. It's a common theme elsewhere in literature, for instance, but I think in pop music it's a bit more scarce. At any rate, so that's all to say. You know, this record, I did like it, right? I did like the funky aspect of it and even the disco adjacent elements, but it didn't really resonate with me super deeply. I don't think, you know, it stood out. I'm beginning to find that the things that stand out to me the most are those which challenge the norm, which are more experimental, which go against what we've come to expect from music and whatever genre. And whether that innovation take place via sound or subject matter in the lyrics or either or both, that seems to be what stands out to me the most as a record that belongs on this sort of list, something that really pushes and innovates, right? And I'm not a scholar of funk or anything like that, so I can't really say if it's super innovative or anything, but at least to my ear, it didn't sound particularly, you know, novel, or it didn't sound like a departure, right? Certainly it was the sort of the launching pad for the career of Chaka Khan, right? So in that sense, it is an interesting, you know, thing to think about as far as the historical moment and so forth. But either way, I decided to rate this one a 6 out of 10, which I call decent, right? Is the sort of word I go along with that rating. So it was a decent record. Wasn't bad, you know. I thought it was nice to listen to, for sure. Didn't seem to challenge my ears or, you know, push me to think of music in a different way or anything like that. Nor was it so overtly beautiful or magnificent that I had to rate it higher, in other words. So it's an interesting point of reflection for me, right? Because I think that, you know, this time around, while I appreciated the last record, which was Arcade Fire's Funeral, I didn't listen to the lyrics so much, and then this time in my reflection, I did pay more attention to the lyrics. So that was an interesting thing there. So I'm kind of, you know, these videos are also meant to sort of note my progressions as a listener and just as a critic, right? Not necessarily a music critic, although that too, but definitely a cultural critic, right? Which is something that I'm not a stranger to, even if I am a relative stranger to music criticism. So yeah, so like I say, 6 out of 10 for this one. Yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Next, we have number 498, right? Which is Suicide's album, which is called Suicide, also published in 1977. So please tune in for that one. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.